Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about poop with Scott Hickle. He is a co-founder of Throne Science. I'm super excited for this conversation. And so, Scott, when we were catching up last, I think you had just hired maybe a CTO, and you guys were going to start looking at, seed fundraising and et cetera. So maybe you could just, give me the story from the top. We could start from the beginning and go through to kind of the current state of things, as you see it. We can kind of go from there if that works for you.
That sounds great. Yeah. So when we last chatted, I guess it would have been March of 2025, probably.
Sounds right.
So at that point, we had just hired the former CTO of Whoop. So John Capitalupo was co-founder and CTO of Whoop. He joined us as chief product officer here at Throne. And so, jumping forward a little bit from the beginning, but John is, one of the innovators of wearables, the pioneers, there are like not a dozen people on the face of the planet who have started wearables companies that have gone on to become valued at $10 billion plus, and John's one of them. And so he left Whoop after a decade. He also has ulcerative colitis. He was diagnosed with that while building Whoop. And so we met in 2024 and I pitched him to join us as an angel investor. The pitch then, we facetiously joked, right? We're building Whoop for your poop or Aura for your flora. And he angel invested. I didn't know this at the time, but he'd been looking to invest in a smart toilet for a while just because he's a firm believer in the value of longitudinal monitoring and continuous passive monitoring. And so he joined as an angel. It was super involved, taking monthly phone calls with us and just has a wealth of knowledge and experience that's just incredibly valuable to an early stage company like we were at the time. And then fast forward, you asked about the seed raise. That was fall of 2024. We went out to raise our first real round of institutional capital around Throne once we'd built our first, we call this a beta prototype.
Nice.
And so this device, first device that I could ship to you and was, you could self-install it. It was battery powered. It had an app that gave you gut health score and hydration score, and you could see your trends. The big challenges with this was number one, this was very much a proof of concept, right? This wasn't waterproof. So one episode of bad aim and it was all over.
Oh gosh.
And then number two, you had to push a button every time you used it. And what we found is that people forget to push the button because you've been going to the bathroom the same way since you were potty trained at 2 years old, and introducing even one extra step there. Particularly easy thing to ask of someone. But at that point, John was helping with a fundraise, and fast forward, asked him, is there a chance that you'd join the team full time? Because of that, he had already left Whoop, and he was like, maybe. And we flew out to Boston, made the pitch, and he heard us out, was very gentle in his, very politely declined us. And then fast forward a few months later, he called us. He had another episode with his ulcerative colitis. It was just like, I think a stay in the hospital is very clarifying. And he came out of that inpatient experience and said, look, this is clearly what I want to spend my time working on, is helping other people like me. And so he joined us full time March 10th of 2025, 1 year to the day before we launched our first mass production product, Throne 1. And so, that's an abbreviated version of how we got to where we are, but I think it's probably worth just taking a step back and saying, what we're building, which is the world's first device to track gut health, hydration, prostate health, hands-free automatically every time you go to the bathroom. You can kind of infer from Whoop for your poop or Aura for your flora what that means, but basically giving you insights into the trends of what's happening in the toilet and helping you decipher what your body's trying to tell you.
Yeah, and for folks who are just listening to the podcast and not on the video, Scott just showed us the prototype version of the Throne. Is there a name for it? Is it Throne? Or,
yeah, we just call the device Throne. So this is Throne 1.
Okay. Yeah, so the prototype was somewhat gigantic, and now the first live production version is very skinny down, and it looks much more ready for your misses on the toilet for us men out there. But yeah, that's super cool. And obviously I've been following you guys, I think maybe even before that, when you guys were doing, because I was writing Hospitalogy back in 2022, and so you guys were doing maybe that kind of nurse hiring thing, and then you pivoted into Throne. And so I was doing some research on just that journey, and it seems like you've got a lot of personal reasons for being a part of it, and maybe some family that's, are physicians helping with that and those sorts of things. And so I'm curious, like, what have you learned to date? Because it's interesting because it's like a medical device, right? But it's D2C currently, right? So what have you learned kind of in that journey of creating this device and going from prototype to production and being D2C? What's kind of the path been like?
Yeah. So I think a very important distinction is we are not a medical device. We're a general wellness device.
Okay,
Which,
cool.
In the eyes of the FDA is a very important distinction.
Right.
And the big difference is that we are not making diagnostic claims. We are just helping you understand the patterns of what's happening in your body. And the types of interventions we are recommending are not medical interventions, they're dietary and lifestyle interventions. But fortunately, when it comes to gut health, so much of your gut health comes down to your diet, your lifestyle, and helping you understand, what are my dietary triggers and sensitivities? What are the, ingredients in my food that cause episodes of bad gut health? How does my stress impact my gut health? How does my hydration impact my sleep or my mood? So there's just so much, in the sandbox of general wellness that is available to us to help you improve your quality of life, which is awesome. And so I think, going back to my personal story with this, both of my parents are doctors, as you kind of alluded to. My dad's also a medical device inventor. And I have personally no chronic digestive diseases, but a lot of family members in my immediate and extended family with chronic digestive diseases, primarily Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, and some IBS. And so that's just always been a conversation in my home. And so personally, I've, for the longest time, wanted to stay far away from healthcare. Just coming from, two doctors as parents and medical device inventor dad, that was big shoes to fill. And I wanted to go forge my own path. And fast forward to 2021, I've been doing primarily software product management most of my career. I was a mechanical engineering student, undergrad, and got pitched this idea of a smart toilet at a poker game. And I was like, that's brilliant. Clearly you named that company Throne. That's inevitable.
Of course, naturally.
That's natural. That's the only name for it.
It is a great name. It is a great name. Kudos to you for that.
It's just a divine moment of inspiration. But didn't actually think we'd start a company around it, right? Like you have a bunch of album names that you love, but you're not going to go write that music. And but you did the classic thing where you buy some domains about it and then just kind of hover on those. And fast forward a couple of years later, my co-founder Tim, who we were thinking about what are we going to go do next. We were working together on a different startup and wanted to go start something of our own and navigating kind of the idea maze. And you'd alluded to Pineway, the nurse staffing concept. So this is, we started thinking about this really in 2022. And at that point, the big problem in healthcare that everybody was just alarmed about was the nurse shortage, particularly through COVID. That was the big problem everybody was talking about in healthcare, and not just nursing, but skilled nursing assistants and medical assistants and techs. And so we were like, well, let's just go build a healthcare staffing marketplace that treats the talent like people and is better and more humane. And so we bootstrapped building a whole two-sided, basically Uber for nurses style concept, shift work, one shift at a time. And as we went and raised our first $1 million to bring that to market. And within a month of trying to commercialize, we realized oh man, we missed the boat on this. COVID is ending and the market is shifting and the need for this product is dead. Like the difference in the universe from 6 months ago to today could not be, more stark of a contrast. And so then we went back to our investors and told them, hey, this was a good idea 6 months ago. Turns out it is not going to be a good market to build in for the next 10 years. And we're going back to the drawing board. And that's when we started, turning over stones again. And Drone was not in the first 30 ideas that we looked at, but killed a bunch of other ideas and finally had a conversation with my mom and asked her, hey, this idea of smart toilets, is there any medical utility to looking at people's waste? And she was emphatic. She was like, honey, in the field of geriatrics, she's a geriatrician, it's like primary care physician for adults 65 up. She's like, in the field of geriatrics, there's this joke that all old people talk about is their kids, their meds, and their poop. And it's so true that in my own practice, I no longer give my phone number to my patients because they'll send me so many pictures of their poop. And Tim and I walked away from that conversation.
God bless
like,
her.
God bless her, right? We were like, oh, but like our eyes were opened and we realized a few things. From number one, like that is the definition of earned wisdom. Like you are never going to read about that in a blog somewhere. Number two, it means that people intuitively appreciate that there's health information in their waste, because that's why they're sending these photos to their doctor asking, am I okay? What does this mean? And finally, we realized that it's so widespread that it changed the way that my mom, as a physician in New Mexico, is changing or is communicating with her patients as a blanket policy. This is a universal problem. And the more we looked into it, the more we were like, wow, it really is crazy that the state of the art for tracking and understanding your gut health and your urinary health is like contact measurement, right? Like have to collect a sample, send it off in the mail, or use a dipstick to analyze your urine. It's gross. People hate doing it. Compliance is like bargain basement. Nobody wants to collect samples of their stool on a regular basis. And a lot of people just refuse to do it. And then we were like, look at all these other great tools that we have to track our sleep and our cardio, our steps, our respiratory health, our metabolic health. But nothing is looking at your gut health or urinary health or hydration on a daily basis, despite the fact that everyone goes to the toilet multiple times a day. And so we set out to build something that was hands-free and automatic and gave you those insights.
Yeah, I love that. That's so interesting because I feel like, so I recall a conversation maybe from like 2 years ago. I was talking to this guy and we were talking about healthcare stuff. And then he brings up like, yeah, once you hit 40, nobody really talks about it, but everybody starts dealing with like, IBS-like symptoms or whatever. And it's just like everybody deals with this, especially in kind of the modern American diet outside of, people who are, on Mediterranean diets or whatever it is. There's a lot of processed foods and those sorts of things. So it makes a lot of sense. And it seems like there's quite a big market here. And that's why, you have the colonoscopy surge. And I think one of my fellow creators, Jared Deshevsky, who writes Healthcare Huddle, he called it, I think he's an internal medicine doc, I can't remember, but he called it like the golden age of older rectums or something like that. And so you guys are kind of hitting on that. I'll send you that article. It's pretty good.
Please.
But I'd love to know, just because I'm not like a, wearables or device guy, like how does the tech actually work? Like, can you walk me through, a patient or a consumer's experience with it, starting with lifting up the toilet lid?
Yep. Great question. Okay. So what we started working on this in June of 2023 and launched in March of 2026. So almost 3 years of just obsessively building the right product, because we recognize like if this is not truly ambient, right, like background, automatic, people aren't going to work with it. And so the way it works is, I'm just going to hold up here a cross section of a toilet. I've got my props. So toilet water goes in here and you lift up the toilet seat, flip the device on like that. Very simple. It takes like literally 1 second to install. And then you pair yourself to the device with your phone. So it uses your phone's Bluetooth to know who's there. So basically the way it works is you walk up to the toilet bowl. This on the top is a motion sensor that identifies when someone is standing at or seated on the toilet. And then the motion sensor wakes the device up and it pings your phone's Bluetooth to identify who's there. Is it Scott or Blake or someone else with a Throne account? If a guest comes and uses that toilet, it stays off because it doesn't activate until it does the Bluetooth handshake and identifies a known Throne user. So it's on when it's supposed to be and off when it's supposed to be. It respects guests' privacy. And so then it's a camera and a microphone pointed down inside the toilet bowl that is recording the contents of the toilet bowl. And it's very important to emphasize, it is pointed down. It cannot see human anatomy.
Okay. Thank you for that distinction.
Yeah, and it's very, very important. And then when you walk away, it senses that you're no longer there. It turns itself off. And then everything gets processed and you get sent a report card basically for what that session looked like. And we measure basically 4 primary categories of health signals. The first is what we call your functional gut health. So that's looking at stool morphology and timing. The most important there are your stool frequency and stool consistency on the Bristol stool scale. So like taking a step back, right? Like what does good gut health look like? I think most people would agree. It's regular, healthy bowel movements. That's good gut health. And anything that strays outside of that is, various degrees of bad gut health. And so just seeing that, what we call the digestive pattern, right? Like we capture that. Just seeing that is very easy to see. Looks like good gut health versus the days that you had bad gut health, the episodes of bad gut health, the weeks of bad gut health, or the months of bad gut health. then you can start to correlate those things to changes in your diet, changes in your medications, changes in your stress levels, right? Like I know from my gut personally, when I go home for the holidays, I immediately level out, and you can see it in my digestive pattern. Then I get back to work and my stress throws me off kilter. It's crazy. I did not know that about myself until I started using this product. I'll take a step back. Looking at stool, we also look at color, volume, sink or float, which can tell you about like fat content or steatorrhea, but those are kind of more long tail things that are less immediately relevant. The next big category we look at is your hydration levels. And that's primarily based on the color of your urine and also the cloudiness. And the most fun thing about this is like that drives incredible engagement. What we find is people love seeing their hydration scores after they go to the bathroom. And the most important thing, the skeptic will say, why do I need this device to tell me how hydrated? And I can look in the toilet. What we find is that 68% of our users see material improvements in their hydration habits after 2 weeks of using the device. Because it's one thing to go to the bathroom and you see it's yellow, but you don't do anything about it. It's a very different thing to 3 minutes later get a push notification that tells you your hydration score is in the 40s. And
that's behavior change right there. That's fascinating.
It's amazing behavior change. Like it blows my mind that we're seeing those results, this soon after launch. And so I did not expect hydration to be as important as it is. But what we find, the other really kind of fun engagement loop here is you wake up every morning dehydrated. That's the longest you've gone without drinking water in a day. And especially if you sleep poorly, it turns out that actually dehydrates you more because you don't release vasopressin. So you wake up, vasopressin is an antidiuretic. So if you sleep for like 6 hours, you wake up more dehydrated than if you slept for 8 hours, which is counterintuitive, but really compelling. And so you wake up dehydrated and then you see your score improve throughout the morning and the rest of the day. And everyone loves seeing their numbers go up and to the right. And that is a daily cycle that you go through with hydration. So it's very compelling from that perspective. The next big category we look at is your bathroom habits. And so that's basically the timeline of your toilet sessions. And the most relevant markers here is number one, your time to first evacuation. It tells you about urgency or constipation, which is particularly relevant to those with digestive diseases who are trying to understand, like that's a huge hallmark that people like gastroenterologists want to understand in their patients with IBD is urgency, because it's largely a subjective feeling, but measuring that timeline is actually a good proxy for it. The next big one is there's an emerging, body of research to support the kind of like, motherly wisdom that sitting on the toilet causes hemorrhoids. And if you sit on the toilet too long, it actually does put pressure on your pelvic floor, which does cause hemorrhoids. And so we send you a push notification after 10 minutes and say, hey, stop doom scrolling, more politely than that. But the largest cause of sitting on the toilet for extended periods of time is having your smartphone on you, right? And so we have the advantage of being able to turn that into a positive thing and say, hey, let's nudge this positive behavior change. We know you're just watching Instagram reels. And then the last big category we look at is a men's health category, which is your urinary flow rate, which is a strong proxy to prostate health. And so this one's amazing to me, that we are able to measure your prostate health based on the sound of your pee. And the reason is, as a man, you intuitively know the difference between the sound of a weak stream and a strong stream. And it turns out it's because it's grounded in science, in that what's called the instantaneous urinary flow rate maps 1-to-1 to the volume of your pee stream as it enters the water basin. And so we've built models.
So I'm so sorry, if your prostate is like enlarged, will it cut off some of the flow, essentially, is what you're saying?
Exactly right.
Wow, interesting. That's
fascinating. Yeah, and so it's, again, just incredibly compelling from a men's health perspective. Like every time you go, you can see how strong was my stream. And it varies primarily based on how hydrated you are. But the peak flow rate, seeing that trend week over week, month over month, year over year, that is really a preventive health metric that if you see it start to trend low, then you can go have an informed conversation about that with your urologist and show them these metrics. And if you catch this early, there are over-the-counter supplements you can take. You can do pelvic floor exercises to reduce the impact of that enlarged prostate and slow down the enlargement of the prostate. If you catch it too late, you're looking at surgery, and they're going to either go out, scoop out a part of your prostate, or, in my grandfather's case, he just got a permanent catheter installed. in
Wow.
his, like, he's like 94 years old, but like he
Sure.
ignored the signs of, this enlarged prostate for far too long, and it can destroy your bladder. And so that's, worst case scenario. But like, I look at that, you if we do our job well, we will spare people that fate.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's really cool. Very interesting use of, you know, throne. And I can't help but think like there is like kind of like a sicko mode like gamification strategy here where like you could like have men rank themselves on flow rate, you know, on your app. Not that you would ever do that or that's anywhere near appropriate, but could be fun. But I am curious to know, so you talked about kind of, prostate and longitudinal data and these sorts of things. And I think I read that you guys have like research relationships with certain universities. And so I'm curious, like, what else kind of clinically are you guys trying to figure out, or have you figured out that could be coming?
Yeah. So I'll just start with the vision, right? Which is like 5 years from now, we want this to be the smoke detector for colon cancer, bladder cancer, kidney cancer, any cancer of the lower GI or urinary tract, really, because the earliest signs of this cancer is microscopic blood in your stool or your urine. And
Wow.
so the next gen device, we're working on hardware right now in the lab to be able to identify those trace amounts of blood that are, way subperceptual, right? Like we're looking at like 100,000 times more sensitive than the naked eye. But if we can do that and identify patterns of bleeding in your stool, right? Because there's a lot of things that can cause blood in your stool, and most of them are benign, you know, fissures, fistulas, hemorrhoids, ulcers, viral infections. But most of those benign things are also transient, right? They come and they go. But bleeding from cancers can be transient, but then also as the cancer, gets bigger and bigger, then you expect more and more bleeding. And,
Hmm.
that's a hallmark of, colorectal cancer is by the time it becomes what's called overt blood, which is blood that you see with the naked eye, it's often progressed to later stages. And it's a pretty large tumor. And so our goal is to get people these patterns while it's still microscopic and throw up a red flag and say, hey, this is a concerning pattern of blood. This appears to be increasing, in concentration week over week, month over month for the last 2-3 months. Go show this data to your doctor. And then at that point, it's a conversation between you and your care team as to what to do next. You could take a Cologuard test or go straight to a colonoscopy, or in the case of, hematuria, blood in your urine, you have a different conversation. But the real goal is just help people identify these early warning signs way before they could on their own. And that has the opportunity to save lives. Like, just the scale of this, by the way, just worth underscoring. Last year, about 43,000 Americans died in car accidents. 50,000 Americans died of colorectal cancer. Like,
Wow.
if
Yeah.
we execute the way I want us to, if we can get thrones on every toilet in the country, then in 10 years, we have the opportunity to save more lives than like Tesla and Waymo combined in the United States, right? Like, if all cars became self-driving cars, we would still have the opportunity to save more lives. That's insane.
That is insane. And so, what's the grand strategy? Like, how do you get thrown on every toilet in America?
Yeah, great question. So I'd say it's kind of like a three-pronged approach, or 3 stages. Stage one, and by the way, I'll just take a step back. We stand on the shoulders of giants here, right? Like, we can look out and see where there's 2 generations of wearables that have educated the market ahead of us. And I look at, the real juggernauts today are obviously Apple Watch, Aura, and Whoop. And all 3 of them launched as consumer wellness devices and ended up going the more medical route, right? Like, Apple Watch started measuring heart rate, but now it does atrial fibrillation, and they're FDA cleared for that. Whoop, same story. Aura launched and ended up going for, they partnered with Natural Cycles, which is FDA cleared for cycle tracking. And, I think our path is going to look very similar, which is we start as a general wellness device focused on, helping people understand their digestive patterns, their hydration, urinary function, etc. But ultimately, we want to go the more medical path and, get FDA clearance to make the kind of claims that we want to make and say, hey, this is like a red flag and you need to go have this conversation. And once we go that route, then that opens us up to conversations with payers. And, obviously there's some actuarial analysis that needs to be done here, and that is way above my pay grade. But I'd be hard pressed to imagine that it is not cheaper to install a, $500 device than it is to pay for end of life care for some segment of the population who is going to get colon cancer, bladder cancer, kidney cancer, etc.
I mean, the device pays for itself 100 times over with one prostate surgery, So
literally. I mean, and the canary in the coal mine for us here is I look at Cologuard, and they're reimbursed at $592. Cologuard Plus is at $592 every 3 years for Americans aged 45 to 85.
And then, so your price point, to your point, is what? It's like $400 for current device, and then is there a subscription as well?
Yeah, so it's the Oura Ring model. So it's $400 for the device plus $6 a month.
Okay.
And the big reason for that is, A, we need to be able to pay for all of the mountains of video data that we're processing per user. And then number two, that it allows us to discount the device if you want to buy multiple. Because we would love for you to have, multiple thrones in your home. I have 2 in the office and 2 at home, and I can use all of them hands-free, automatic. It's awesome, right? Like my account follows me around to whichever toilet I use for 80% of the time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. So I'm curious, because you mentioned Whoop, Aura, Apple Watch. It seems like what you're tracking, because those are, like, I know Apple Watch has, the heart now, right? And I think there's some talk about Aura with blood pressure maybe and those sorts of things. But it seems like what you're building and what you're tracking seems, in my opinion, to be much more powerful and actionable, because it's literally tracking like waste that goes through your body. Can you kind of like speak to that, like the differentiation between like a general wearable versus a throne?
I think it's just 2 different lenses on your health, right? And like, a general wearable like, or Apple Watch is looking at primarily, cardio. So like resting heart rate, heart rate variability. They can also look at respiratory rate when you're sleeping. Cardio is obviously very responsive to, exercise and stress. Same, HRV moves a lot with stress. CGMs and, continuous hormone monitors are great for looking at metabolic health. And then, or ketone monitors, my bad. And then Throne is looking at GI and urinary health. And your GI in particular is highly responsive to changes in, like we were talking about, your diet, your lifestyle. Tens of millions of Americans have dietary triggers and sensitivities or intolerances that they don't understand, right? Or they have mystery gut health issues that they think are food related, but it turns out it's stress related. But the current gold standard for figuring that out is a very laborious, painful process, because like right now, there's kind of 2 different gold standard approaches. One is going on an elimination diet, and that's basically saying I'm going to cut down all of my foods to like, white rice and, these low FODMAPs, and then slowly reintroduce one category of the FODMAPs one at a time for like 2 weeks at a time until I find the thing that causes me to have, distress. And that is incredibly difficult because it requires an like superhuman amount of discipline, and food is intrinsically social, right? Like when you go out to eat, it's hard to maintain a strict diet that is that restrictive.
Yeah.
The next gold standard is working with a dietitian or nutritionist who will then tell you, like, keep a manual stool log or a bowel movement log, keep a manual journal of everything you eat. And we're just going to go through and look at them side by side and say, okay, it looks like, last time you had an episode of bad gut health, or the last 3 times you had an episode of bad gut health, you had coffee on an empty stomach, or you had, food with gluten in it, or, Chinese food, whatever it is, right? And the challenge with that is, again, people hate keeping like detailed logs of every time they went to the bathroom and every time they ate. And then even if they actually did show up with, the perfect data, that's not particularly rigorous analysis, right? You're just kind of eyeballing it. And so this is all a very long-winded answer to your question of, how is Throne different than, other wearables? And I'd say the shape of the problem is very similar in that, Whoop has this journal feature. So you can journal every morning, what your day looked like, or what your habits look like. What did you take your supplements? Did you drink alcohol? Did you smoke weed? And it obviously records your exercises automatically as well. So you get these inputs. And same thing with Throne. We are building a system to correlate your inputs to your outputs. It's just our outputs are your literal outputs. And we have a pretty fun advantage in that, unlike Whoop, where the expectation is if you're logging this, you're logging it every day. We don't care about your inputs when you have good gut health, right? If you're having regular healthy bowel movements, great, good for you. Keep it up. Whatever you're doing, don't change it. But when we see you have episodes of bad gut health, then we can selectively ask you, what changed over the last 24 hours? And we're building an AI that has that conversation with you the same as a dietitian and nutritionist would, and ask you, was there changes? Were you traveling? Were you stressed at work? Did you eat anything? Are there any culprits that you suspect in your diet? And really, give us that full picture of what happened in the last 24, 38 hours, or 48 hours. And then over the course of, 90 days, as we see repeat episodes of bad gut health, we can start to correlate the things that are most often associated. And so phase one of this is just showing you personally, right? Okay, Blake, it looks like 80% of the time when you have episodes of bad gut health is because you had that almond milk latte in the morning. Maybe try cutting that out, right?
Sounds right.
Yeah. And then, but then, as we build out this data set and have tens of thousands of people, the future of this is, okay, for the other people with a similar digestive profile to you, right? Similar inputs and outputs, these are the interventions that actually work for them. And so for the other people who have what we would call a similar gastrotype, right? Your gut's phenotype. It looks like,
I see.
It looks like for people like you, Blake, they see relief within a week by adding psyllium husk to their diet, or by cutting red meat 50%, or by shifting their meals to be 3 hours before they go to bed. That's the level of granularity. And so the magic that we want to build towards is helping people identify what are the material lifestyle changes I can make to find relief faster. And if we can do that, that changes lives.
Yeah. And behavior change, to your point, that's pretty powerful and pretty, because you're working with something very intimate, which is the bathroom, poop,
Totally.
People don't like talking about that necessarily. And the actionable kind of adaptive way you're doing it with AI seems really interesting, where it's not like you don't have to keep a log every day, but hey, we noticed this change, and therefore now we're going to, lean into that and see what could have happened in the past 24 hours. Was there a change to your diet, to your point, et cetera? And then that can manifest into real change quickly, which is very cool. I'm curious, what's kind of the coolest, maybe the coolest is the wrong word, but craziest thing somebody has found, insight wise, using Throne to date?
I mean, there's a few that come to mind. So one of the earliest ones, all right, so I'll just rattle off three. So one of our beta users told me, I had this device, and again, it was the big clunky one, right? And, the box that thing came in was massive. And so he was I had this unopened box sitting in my bedroom for a month. And finally my girlfriend was like, what is that thing? Install it, you complain about your gut health all the time, do something about it. And so he was I installed it. And within the first week, it was clear, my gut health score was hovering in the 50s, which means, that's not great. And it was and that accountability really did help me drive changes in my diet. And between that and Whoop, I got much more buttoned up about my diet and exercise. And within 2 months, my average gut health score was now high 80s.
Wow.
And I'm a big believer, what gets measured gets managed. And I think, one of the most common response from skeptics is why would I need this device to tell me what my poop looks like? And the reality is well, it's not what your poop looks like. It's what your digestive patterns look like over the last month, over the last 6 months. And the reality is there's studies in IBD literature where patients are asked to keep a stool log. And then at the end of the week, they are asked how many times you go to the bathroom last week. And then they compare that response to the actual metrics from their stool log. People are on average 30% accurate.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's after 1 week, and you've been keeping track of it like religiously for that week, and you still don't get it right, right? And so just having that accountability to yourself and being able to go back and see those changes in your digestive patterns is so informative and educational. So, and it really does motivate, to your point, behavior change. The next one that I think has been fun is one of our earliest users did what you always do with wearables, which is you take screenshots of all the different trends in the app and you upload them to ChatGPT or now Claude and ask,
Of course.
hey, what does this mean? What do I do about this? And he wrote back and he was like, I did not realize that waking up in the middle of the night to pee was abnormal.
Wow.
And I've been doing that as long as I can remember, like 2 times a night. And I saw that in my throne data, and that was the biggest thing that this AI system flagged for me. And then I asked it, okay, what do I do about it? And it gave me a new evening routine and basically told me, like, shift your creatine intake to the morning. Like, don't drink water within an hour of bed. And now I sleep through the night. I have materially better sleep quality because I got on top of my urinary health.
Yeah.
And that's a really cool. And then another fun one, like in the past week, is that we have a member with Crohn's disease who has been experiencing a flare for the first time in years as of the last several months, which is, very frustrating to him.
Yeah.
And he was saying, having my throne data, because typically you would assume that blood in your stool when you're flaring from IBD is because of the flare. He said, what I was able to go back and see from my throne data was that it looks like every time there's blood in my stool, it's on the day I went on a run. And
Wow.
he was like, I don't know what that means, but it doesn't seem like it's correlated to my IBD. It seems more like, an exercise-induced hemorrhoid or something. But
Just
I'm gonna,
inflammation.
yeah. And he's like, I'm going to be able to take this data into my GI physician on my next appointment and like actually have an informed conversation about this kind of correlation that, like, before this, I never had that. And so I think that there's just already so many things. And then I guess the last big one to share is, we talked about this already, but just like 2 in 3 of our users, 68%, see better hydration habits after 2 weeks using the device. Like, that's an amazing story that I wouldn't like. That's most people, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm a college football fan, and this reminds me of, there was this kind of semi-viral image that the University of Texas college program had put up on the locker room wall that was like your level of hydration, and it went from like championship level, which is like clear, all the way down to like terrible teammate or something like that. It was super funny. So that just like reminds me of that. It's like kind of gamification, but you're not necessarily gamifying it. You're measuring it, and then you're nudging and saying, hey, you're dehydrated. So 2 sides of the same coin, I guess, there. But
Yeah.
that's cool. Those are really cool stories.
I appreciate that. So I just pulled up this chart. I know exactly the one you're talking about. It's called the Longhorn Football Hydration Chart. I just want to go through the levels here because it's hilarious. So the first 3 are the, like clear to like, pale yellow. And that's championship hydration levels.
There you go.
And then the next category down from that is selfish teammate.
Selfish teammate. Yeah,
And then the next
that's
below
right.
that is blatant disregard for your teammates. And then the last one, which is, basically orange or auburn, is like all caps, 3 exclamation points. You are a underlined bad guy.
That's too funny. I wish it seems like we didn't, as a team, quite get to championship level hydration, because I have yet to see a national championship. So, but I guess we did win the Big 12. So there's that at the very least. But yeah, that's super funny. Maybe you should incorporate that chart into your application. It'd be pretty funny. You're at championship level of hydration today. Congratulations. And then what was the bottom one? Like, you're a bad person.
You are a bad guy. Yeah, I don't know that that's quite on brand for us, telling our users that they're bad
That might
people.
not land. That might not land. Yeah, let's stray from that for sure. Okay, so something else you mentioned was, you guys are processing like a ton of video data and capturing image and those sorts of things. So what I'm curious about is obviously like, the AI component of this and like the continual like clinical training and those sorts of things. So can you walk me through that? Like, I would assume, like, so are those images, are you training a model on those images, or how does that all kind of work in the back
Great
end?
question. So the way it works in the back end, we do use the images to continue training and improving our models. So we strip all of the identifying data away from it, right? So like by the time anybody's looking at it, it can't be traced back to Blake or Scott. So we throw it over a wall, and then we have a team of gastroenterologists go through and label the images. And so the way the system basically works is we have an AI model that if it detects an image that it can't recognize, or is, this doesn't seem like something we've seen before, this is out of distribution, we flag that and then submit that to the GI team to relabel so that we can retrain the model and then improve, the coverage of our distribution. And so, that's the basic flow, and that's how we, improve the accuracy. Like, we're publishing our first abstract later this year that shows that our AI model is as accurate as board certified gastroenterologists at assessing stool form, which
Wow.
is pretty awesome.
That's sick.
Yeah, we're very, very proud of that result. We just got our first institutional review board approved for a validation study with a urologist at Stanford, validating our Euroflow accuracy. And that was, an incredible labor of love. Like, most of the work over the last 3 years was identifying, what is the form factor of this that's going to make people comfortable using this, right? Camera facing down, 30-day battery life,
That's
easy to
huge.
clean. Yeah, there's so much. It has to be battery powered because most people don't have a spare outlet near their toilet. It has to be hands free. Like, there's so much, obsession and consideration that went into just what is the user experience like, right? Like, what makes this truly passive, zero friction usable? And then, the rest of the obsession went into making sure it's accurate and making sure that when you get the results, you trust them. Because if you don't trust the results, it's game over. And so we have a dedicated R&D engineer whose whole job is just running through tests all day, every day, improving the accuracy of our models. And then, like, similarly, urine color, which we correlate to hydration, we're constantly fine tuning and trying to get as accurate as we can there. We're working with a team out of University of Texas Medical Branch to get what's called remnant urine samples. So like after they test for urine in their pathology lab, then it's de-identified and it's no longer traceable back to the source, and we can use that to continue training our models. So there's just honestly a incredible web of processes happening in the background all day, every day, to increase the accuracy of our existing models. And we're already very accurate, but we want to get the more data we collect, the more accurate we can be, and we want to take advantage of that. And then there is the more data we collect, the more things we can do, right? So like a great example of this, like on the roadmap for us, is like we only have a handful of like identified parasites in our data set.
Interesting.
But like,
I see.
As we get these out into thousands and thousands of people's hands, we'll have more of those parasites, and then we'll be able to tell someone, hey, this looks like you might have a parasite, or hey, this looks like undigested food.
And I know that's like a good thing to identify that, but I'm just imagining like me pulling up, throwing an app, and it's saying like, "Hey, you have worms," or something like that. That's terrifying, but also like great at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very real question. Of like, would you rather know or not? And it's a highly personal answer.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think knowledge is power, like you said. If it's not, it can't be treated if you don't know, right? But so something that's really cool that I have a question on is you kind of mentioned, hey, we've had this validated with GI docs, urologists, etc. And I'm a business guy, so I think about kind of your future go to market and stuff. We've talked about payers, and you're currently mostly direct to consumer, I would guess right now. So how have you thought about kind of other downstream channels, like maybe partnering with GI docs or like a handoff kind of thing, or some sort of risk arrangement where you're part of that and the GI docs managing, I don't know, stuff like that, Have you given any thought to how you can kind of more firmly entrench yourself from a commercial perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the big items on our roadmap for this year is building what we call our caretaker dashboard, our clinician dashboard. And the whole idea there is that as a GI doc or a urologist or a functional medicine practitioner or a nursing home, skilled nursing facility or memory care facility, like you should be able to, and there's kind of two different use cases here. So first I'll do the clinician, right? So like I am your doctor and I want to be able to track your gut health or your hydration or your, prostate health. And I will sell you the Throne device, and then you have the option to share your data back to me. You have to opt into that, right? Like this is not automatic, but if you want to share your data with me, then I can set up triggers on my side that tell me, hey, let me know anytime, Blake has a critically low flow value that is sustained over the next week, right? Like that could be worth a conversation. Let me know anytime Blake has, 4 episodes of diarrhea within 24 hours. That could be worth a conversation or just worth checking in on. And particularly with patients with chronic digestive diseases, like being able to have that data shared with your doctor so you can have the conversations where they're most critical is super interesting to the GIs that we talk to. The next use case is that's kind of that same idea but applied to like nursing facilities or like live-in assisted living facilities, where instead of the device being yours personally, it would be owned by the facility and administered by the facility. But they're already using things like doorstop sensors to know, like, is my resident going to the bathroom or not? But that doesn't actually give them any insight into, like, did they have a bowel movement or are they trying and they're constipated? And so they love this because particularly for residents in memory care, like, they often don't know. And, like, constipation can land someone in inpatient or, like elevated urinary frequency. It's just like, you see someone go to the bathroom on average, 5-6 times a day, and then it spikes to 12 times a day. That can be a sign of a UTI.
Yeah.
And
but I also saw fall detection, I think on your website, maybe, like, because you guys, dehydration is a potential cause for falls in nursing homes, right?
Yeah. And just monitoring people's hydration levels. Like in adults over age 65, accidental falls is the number 1 cause of accidental death. And the third leading cause of accidental falls is chronic dehydration. And that's only behind loop diuretics and antipsychotics, which are both, pharmacological in nature. But then there's the lifestyle, which is just like chronic dehydration materially decreases your, balance, particularly as you're older. And when your bones are brittle, like one fall, break your hip, that is the beginning of the end for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's crazy. So, speaking from somebody with personal experience, my grandma recently moved from her apartment into either a SNF or a nursing facility of some kind, and she is kind of in that falling cycle right now. And so I just wonder, if this device had been installed, like, maybe she was dehydrated, because I think a lot of the falls happen at night too, right? And they're disoriented, they get out of bed, and that sort of happens. So it's just interesting for you to say this, and then you think about the implications and the use cases in senior populations, with GI docs, with urologists, and, just even from a direct to consumer perspective. So this is all like super exciting, but I'm curious from your perspective, like, what are potential roadblocks for you when it comes to, distribution, or like how do you kind of see that playing out?
I mean, I think just in general, I accept that this is going to be a slow build over the course of the next several years, right? And I look at Aura Ring. This is all public information, but Aura sold like 2,400 rings when they did their Kickstarter back in 2016, 2015. And it took them about 5 years to sell their first 150,000 rings. When they announced their Series B, they'd sold 150,000 rings, and that was in March of 2020. And then in March of 2022, they announced that they'd crossed 1 million rings lifetime. So it took them 2 years to sell their next 850,000 rings, which is a pretty amazing, inflection point. And then in 2025, they sold 3 million rings. And
they're what? They raised like $1 billion?
Yeah, they raised $1 billion. They're worth 11 billion. Like, but that's the overnight success that took a decade, right?
Yeah. You don't see that initial, surge, or like the initial kind of grind of what it takes to get there.
Exactly. But now they have, amazing hardware. They have a tremendous amount of literature and research supporting it. And that's the path that we're on. We're already partnered with some of the world's leading researchers in the field of GI. We have a amazing opportunity not only to help people understand their bodies in a wellness fashion, the same way that Aura does, but like long term, we have the opportunity to save lives. And I think the biggest blocker is just patience. It's accepting that we're asking people to put cameras in their toilets. That is a new and understandably shocking concept, and it's going to take time. And the analogy I like to use here is like when Uber first launched, that was an insane idea that you would ride in a stranger's car, right?
It's a good point. Yeah,
When
takes a
Airbnb
shift.
launched, yeah, that was an even crazier idea that you would sleep in a stranger's home. And especially, like, I'll never forget my first Airbnb stay. Like, it was literally a bedroom in someone's home and she was there. Like,
Is that right?
like, yeah, you forget, like, Airbnb, like, was, air bed and breakfast. The expectation was that the host was, like, living there and provide breakfast for you. Like, that was how that got started. And now, like, both of these concepts are so commonplace, it's, like, not even a conversation. And I think the reality is, like, so many great, useful products in the world start out with a taboo and overcome that taboo and change people's perceptions. And I think, some people think it's crazy to put a camera in your toilet today. I think in 10 years, it'll be crazy not to have one.
I'm with you. I think when I think about your statement around taboo, I'm like, okay, maybe their biggest blocker is like from a social acceptance standpoint. Cause like, I'm just thinking if I, host somebody for a barbecue or something and somebody goes to the bathroom and they're like, hey, there's like a camera in here. Like what's going on with that? And maybe, you can't see the camera. It's cause it's pointing down and all that. But I think over time, like to your point, like that will become less of a thing and pretty easily explainable too, as far as like, hey, yeah, I track my poop health and this is what, I'm more hydrated now, or whatever. So that's exciting. But yeah, so you mentioned a few things, roadmap and go to market and in the future. Would love to leave the last kind of healthcare and throne related question on like what to expect from you guys and rest of 2026 and kind of, 5-year roadmap.
Yeah, I mean, so I'd say for 2026, the big things are going to be we're shipping that AI gut health coach. And that's going to be one that it just will get better the more time it has in market just to marinate. Just V1 is not going to be nearly as powerful as V2, which is not going to be nearly as powerful as V3. One of the features I'm very looking forward to with V2 of this AI gut health coach is this idea of running personal experiments on yourself. Being able to say, okay, like I'm going to just isolate one independent variable. I'm going to cut red meat out of my diet for a week, or I'm going to cut gluten out of my diet, or dairy out of my diet, or I'm going to add this supplement, or I'm going to add this probiotic. And let's just see what that does to my gut health over the span of 1 week, maybe 2 weeks. And then every day it's just a habit tracker, right? You just go in and say, did I do the thing that I said I was going to do? And then we'll be able to show you after, that period of time, what did the changes look like? Did you have more regular, more healthy bowel movements? Did you have, more loose or liquid bowel movements? And basically it's like, was it good or bad for your health? And like, after running through 10 of those personal experiments, you will absolutely have learned 2 or 3 things that help your gut health, maybe even 2 or 3 things to avoid. But all of that knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
And then that ultimately feeds the V3 that we talked about, which is, okay, for the other people that had similar inputs and outputs, what were the changes? What were the interventions in their diet and lifestyle and supplement stack that drove the most positive change? And that's really our focus over the next year is building that out. And then over the next 5 years, it's getting the version of the device out that can look for those microscopic quantities of blood and then also measure the proxies for your microbiome through gases. That's a very exciting one for us. Your microbiome is obviously, all the rage in terms of the current discourse in gut health. And it's tough because there's really medical consensus around what constitutes a healthy microbiome. There's so many different compositions that, again, I think as long as you have healthy functional gut health, how you get there is a million ways to bake a cake. But by measuring gases, there's 10,000 microbes, but there's only like 5 or 6 gases that they all emit. And by measuring the relative concentrations of those gases, you can tell something about the health of the microbiome. And I think intuitively we'd all appreciate, right? When you're sick, when you have food poisoning, it smells terrible. One of the hallmarks of C. diff overgrowth is that it smells like death. And that's all gas concentrations. And so,
Fascinating.
yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff we can do there. And that's where we want to get in 5 years, is just telling you more and more interesting things about your health that you would never otherwise know or track about yourself.
When you say all these things and, the roadmap and even our conversation today, I just can't help but get excited not only about what you guys are building in the world of poop, but just the future state of longevity and wearables and tracking information. I think that I might, right after this, go to your website and buy one of these. Because it is, I saw it's HSA eligible, and I'm like, man, I got some money in the HSA. I'm going to do them and test this thing out. So that's really cool. And, I wish nothing but success for you guys, especially given the potential impact that you guys could have on, the general population. So I'm a fan. I'm rooting for you guys. Okay, Scott, my last question for you is just more of a personal question I ask everybody at the end of any podcast. And it is, has there been an experience or advice or something you've consumed, book, video, whatever, that has kind of fundamentally changed the way you live your life?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. My favorite category of books, or just content in general, is people with a terminal diagnosis writing about life on their deathbeds. And there's a lot of books in this genre. I think the best three, for me personally, are Not Fade Away by Peter Barton, The Last Lecture, and Tuesdays with Morrie. And Not Fade Away in particular, I reread if not every year, then every 2 years. And I think the reason I love, and Ben Sass, very famously is currently dying of stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and he just did an interview with Ross Douthat, columnist at the New York Times, this past week that is just completely flooring. It's one of the most beautiful, hours of content you'll ever watch. Just how brave he is in the face of death. It is just, I think, when you are looking at your own mortality on a finite timeline, you got 12 months or less. It brings incredible, remarkable clarity as to the things that matter in life. And I have, I've been a student of the lessons and the wisdom that, those dying people have shared. And it has given me a lot more appreciation for what matters in my own life. And it's always relationships, right? It's relationships. And then, people always say the things they regret are the things they didn't do, right? You very rarely regret sins of commission, but at the end of your life, if you didn't do things, those sins of omission, those eat at you. And so I think, when in doubt, kiss the girl or the boy.
Absolutely. I love that. And I can't help but think of some conversations I've had with hospice nurses and things like that, and the things they've shared about folks who are dying, that it's just so powerful because, at the end of the day, morbid or not, we're already talking about poop, but you all go into the same ditch at the end of the day, right? Yeah. From a earthly perspective, whether you're religious or not, that's not up to me. But the other thing I think about is just the Artemis 2 recent mission where the astronauts were going behind the moon, and I can't remember what the effect is called, but it's some sort of psychological effect where you're looking on that, the pale blue dot, and you're like, man, everything that has ever existed that I know is there, and I am the farthest person from humanity at the moment from that. And I just feel like that gives you so much perspective, and you think about the vastness of the universe and how what it boils down to your point, are the relationships and the regrets and those sorts of things. So I appreciate those. I'm going to add those to my Goodreads, as I do with everybody who comes on and suggests books. So thank you for that. And Scott, thank you for an illuminating conversation about the gut and about poop. Like I said, I wish you guys nothing but success, and thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, man. And then last thing I'll say is I'll go ahead and create a discount code for you for Hospitalogy. So before you buy your throne, let me make a Hospitalogy discount code. I'll make it 20% off, so that's save $80. And then you can stack your HSA on top of that. But I'll get that done here in the next 3 minutes once we wrap up this call. And thank you so much for having me on today, man.
Okay, yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate that. This is not sponsored. He's just doing that out of the goodwill of his heart, so much appreciated.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Scott. All right,
Thanks,
have
Blake.
a good one.